So welcome to the December 20th meeting of the Richmond-Hinesburg Police Governance Committee. I think for the sake of the recording, anybody watching this later, it'd probably be a good idea if we just went around the table and introduced ourselves. So my name is Jay Furr. I'm chair of the Richmond Select Board.
My name is Josh Arneson. I'm town manager in Richmond.
Maggie Gordon, vice chair and the select board.
Todd Odit, Hinesburg town manager.
And here in the room.
Andy Squires from Richmond Constable.
Okay, and then on Zoom. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Anthony Cambridge, police chief.
Anthony Cambridge Police Chief. Okay. And then we have we have 3 people on the Zoom.
I'm Marilee Lovell, chair of the Hinesburg Select Board.
I'm Ann Sullivan. I live at the Meadow Mist Development in Hinesburg.
And Bard, if you are speaking, you are muted. There we go.
Good morning. I'm Bard Hill, the vice chair of the select board. Sorry, I can't be there.
We're actually, given the circumstances, glad you're not. He has COVID. The gift that keeps on giving. Okay. Does any member of the public want to make a public comment before we jump in? Okay. Our agenda is very simple. It's discussion of shared police services. Is there anything we should add to the agenda? Seeing none. Okay. So this is meant to be a discussion, but I'd like to kind of start off with a couple quick comments. Town of Richmond is very pleased with the way that the arrangement has been going for us. We've heard numerous extravagant thank yous and compliments from our citizens about how glad they are to have police patrolling and doing a good job and enforcing speeds, especially. I hear more about that than almost anything. Our townspeople are getting to know the Hinesburg officers by name. You know, they're glad to see them, and I understand the officers generally like patrolling over here. So we're pleased with that arrangement. But to pick up the discussion that we started a couple of years ago, would there be interest in taking it to the next level where we're sharing services now? Do we want to make it more formal? But I think the first question really needs to be the Hinesburg study. And we have been hearing for a while that'll be available next week. So let's just toss the ball over to Todd about that.
Yeah, so we should be getting that soon, but you know what I do know, the report is going to encourage continued cooperation and working with Richmond. You know, I don't know that's going to say specifically how to do that, but I think just looking at regional solutions, it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's definitely going to be one of the recommendations.
Thanks, Marilee.
It seems to be working well, and I would be happy if we can continue. Glad we can work with Richmond. It just makes sense. We're towns about the same size, about the same demographics, and it makes sense to share resources.
Right. When we talk about resources, I don't know how closely you follow Richmond events, but this building that we're in, very substandard. It's deficient in many, many ways. One of them is police capacity. It's, if you ever walk through our station downstairs, it's in terrible shape. Rooms we can't use, and it's just not suitable for a modern 21st century police department. We don't have a Sally Port. And we came to the conclusion a while back, why would we want to build one if we can just use yours? We don't need to duplicate things like a full Sally Port. And so it's questions like that, like, does each town need to have all the accoutrements of a full police department? Or can we make use of the Hinesburg police station for processing and so forth, but then have capacity over here for officers to, I don't know, do reports, store weapons, I don't know if we'd want to have one evidence locker. That's not my, but don't waste money on infrastructure if we can share it. And then there's the question of sharing the police chief, which is essentially what we're doing now. I can't speak for Anthony about, is this a sustainable solution? Do you find that you're putting in more hours a week than you'd care to juggle both towns?
Yes, it's there's a lot. But I also think that some of that can be the more officers we get, the better it will get. little bit of administrative help, but also changing the way having the towns, for instance, when I look at the Richmond budget and the Hinesburg budget, they're just totally different. It would be helpful to have a lot of things similar. It would make the job a lot easier. And maybe if we move toward a police union district, that would solve that.
Can you give us an example? Just,
If I'm buying two things for something for Hinesburg, something for Richmond. Recently, I bought the law changed in January. We have to have soft restraints in every cruiser. So what line item am I taking that out of in Richmond? What line item am I taking out? How I'm coding it different in Hinesburg, coding it different in Richmond. I got to remember which bill to send to which town,
Right.
So a lot of that stuff, I don't think, I think as we move forward and the budgets get similar and things get very similar, things would be easier. And I know that sounds like a small thing, but when you translate that to the day-to-day actions, it does become significant.
okay. Another issue that we've been hearing about recently has to do with officer pay. The issue of Richmond officers patrolling in Richmond are paid $2 an hour more than Hinesburg, and that's caused anecdotally some discontent.
It's been noticed. Let me just put it that way. I don't know that there's I'm certainly keeping an eye out for discontent. Todd and I have spoke about it. Josh and I have spoke about it. But it certainly does. It is an awkward situation to have an officer essentially working in Hinesburg, patrolling both towns. And if they were paid by Richmond, they could theoretically make, $2 more an hour, whatever it may be. I think we had looked at some of them and they weren't that much different,
No.
but there were a few that were different. So.
Yeah. Certainly an issue. Could develop into one. There's essentially, right now, we've implemented a stipend for them, like a monthly stipend. To sort of recognize that.
Okay. And I know that another thing that we're very grateful to Anthony for is recruitment. We had no success at all for years. I mean, a lot of towns have had this issue recruiting new officers. We currently have sort of an officer. He's always on military leave. He volunteers for military deployment. So he's not on mandatory ones. He's on optional ones too. We haven't actually seen his butt in a police car in, I think, something like 2 years, but he's still technically a member of our department. And you can't patrol with somebody who's never here. So we have been doing Anthony's been doing a very good job bringing candidates to us. We interviewed one officer candidate a month or so ago, and I believe his background check is hopefully close to being done.
We're working on it. Yeah.
Okay. And then we have an interview tomorrow with a candidate corporal who we have to interview the officer and the dog. He's a canine officer, so he's bringing his dog with him.
We don't want to say where he's from.
Yeah. So up to this point, we've been in kind of an awkward situation where you have the officers and we want to share them. It's like, can I come over and share your this or your that or the other? And we're not bringing much to the table, other than dollars. But it will be nice if we are able. We have 3 open positions because we have 4 authorized positions. One is filled by our absent guy. And we have 3 others. And so if we were to hire the corporal candidate who I haven't even met yet, the officer we have interviewed recently who's doing his background check, we'd have room for 1 more and then we'd be fully staffed, which would we'd like it to be 4 real officers. But still, that's a heck of a lot better than where we were a year ago. And so I've been telling people, they say, why is everything different? I say, it comes a lot down to the personality and the connections of the chief. You want to know that you've got somebody you want to work for and not this hypothetical chief who doesn't exist. So, I mean, we've gotten a lot out of this arrangement besides just coverage. Can I add anything to that? I mean, you're not speaking much and you're involved in this too.
No, I think that's accurate. And I think in addition to recruitment, Anthony's done a really great job in helping kind of shore up the department in a number of ways, looking at items that we need to purchase, safety, security items first and foremost, and then other supplies that we need, kind of in general, cleaning the office up, helping us get cruisers for sale. So I really appreciate kind of getting our department sort of back in track a little bit.
Right. And on the cruisers for sale, we did a bid opening today for the other cruiser.
Cool.
I don't know if we can announce the amount, but we had,
It's public.
okay. So we have a bid from a local guy for 5250, which is pretty good for 2017. This one doesn't have a dent.
Mhm.
It has a few more miles though, right?
Yes, this one's higher.
The other one, we got 3,800 or so.
4,500.
45, okay, still, it'll be nice to have those two 2017 cruisers with a lot of miles off our parking lot and out of here. And so you've helped us with that. I mean, even just little things like the cosmetics of the cars,
Hmm,
you know,
right.
I think having them re-decaled and repainted and so forth, they're a lot more noticeable now. And I think that, you know, our old cars just look like black SUVs driving around. Now they're noticeable. People see them going down the street. They're like, hey, we have police. So some of it's just optics, but I'm just kind of going down a list of things that have worked very well for us and that we're grateful for.
Well, the optics on knowing that people are out, officers are out there checking for speeding. I mean, that, I think for us, that's one of the number one things as well that people ask for. So that's a big, having that visibility is a big one.
Thinking about sort of next logical steps, one of the things that I'm curious about is that you've looked into whether under your CBA, if theoretically, if you had Richmond officers, would they be able to provide coverage in Hinesburg?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good question.
Because what I see as possibly a next step or an option is, getting a few officers here. We have a few officers continue sharing the chief and being able to cover both towns with all of the officers that are employed by each town.
So in other words, somebody might be hired as a Richmond officer, but might be still patrolling in Hinesburg.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I don't,
Yeah.
that might be, we are actually meeting with our union tomorrow. And do we have that on the list? We have a whole list of topics.
No, we don't, but we should bring that up. That's
Right.
that's a good question. I hadn't thought about the crossover.
Yeah, because that would be ideal, that we'd be able to
Well, right.
cover each. If
Yeah.
Richmond can only stay in Richmond,
That makes
Well,
sense.
yeah.
Works a
A
lot.
little unequal, yeah.
And the union, I can't speak for the union exactly, but the union wants us to fill those positions. They want employees. And so long as they're getting paid and the conditions of work are discussed and nailed down, I would hope that they wouldn't object.
Yeah, but I have heard, I forget who I heard it from, but in this last couple of years of a situation where officers were being asked, maybe you told me that, they were being asked to cover a different town. And they got upset about that because it was like a change in work conditions, or maybe it wasn't you. But I think it's a good thing to bring with the union, because if they say, well, our working conditions are Richmond, we don't have a reasonable expectation to go outside of that. So let's, I think, bring that up and put that into the next agreement. So our union agreement right now expires at the end of June next year. So we got 6 months left. So we've already started the conversation with the union for what do we need to change. But I think we should certainly add that.
And another, obvious issue is your officers in Hinesburg are represented by a union, but they're not members of the union, and it's a different union than what we've
I
got.
don't even know, they petitioned to join a union, we just don't have a CBA.
Right.
They're FOP, they pay FOP, they have union representation. From my understanding, the union rep keeps reaching out to them to ask them, and finally he said, hey, you let me know when you're ready to do a contract. The officers asked to meet with me and they said that they're happy with sort of Todd and I being the representation to that Hinesburg is giving them what they want, so they don't think they need a contract, at least at this point. So they still want the protections of the union, if something catastrophic were to happen. So that's why they still want to be union.
And so that would obviously bring up a question of, if we've got a union contract and you've got a union but no contract, do we wind up with one union representing both towns or what? I'm not an attorney.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Okay, so if we, under a shared agreement where we still have a separate RPD and HPD, sure. If we go more toward a union district, at some point, I think something would have to give.
Yes.
So right now, I think right now it sounds like we're kind of thinking directions of how to improve the current agreement. And like we said, fully staff the RPD and then take the next step when we feel ready, if we feel ready at that point.
The next step being the district.
Being actually forming a district. Their question, I don't want to jump the gun too much, but there are questions about, well, how would we do a district? Do we form a joint board, a legal entity? I mean, I believe we'd have to form a legal, and then, but the governing board, if we say, well, we'll have 2 members of the Richmond Select Board, 2 members of the Hinesburg Select Board, well, that's a 4-person board, and that doesn't really work well. So what do we do to make it an odd number? One suggestion that I've been looking into this is both sides agree on a 5th person who would be not necessarily a member of the governing body of either town, but would be somebody who would be a 5th member of the board. Stuff like that. I don't know if that's the right way, but these are questions we'll have to look at some point.
Yeah, and that's it. You may not recall when the first step in going down the path of a union district is creating that joint survey committee, and that's the responsibility of the survey committee. We're figuring all that stuff out and providing a recommendation that is ultimately voted on.
Right. So on the subject of the survey committee, I was not here when this all started. June Heston was here when she was select board chair. So tell us all a little bit and the people watching know about the survey committee.
So I think we even had a draft resolution
Yeah.
kind of set up for a survey committee. So basically survey the 2 towns or whatever towns are interested in forming a union district, establish a survey committee, and that's under statute, and it's the responsibility of that committee to do the research of what is, and provide a recommendation that then would be voted on by the voters of whatever municipalities are interested in creating the union district. That's what happened with the regional dispatch discussion. They went through that whole process. But so the 2 boards currently, they would decide how the survey committee, the composition of the survey committee, what it is. And then that survey committee would provide a recommendation on, the composition of the union district. Kind of
Makes sense. Okay, so it looks like we've got kind of a 2-tiered path at this point. One, continue to investigate what we can do as things currently stand, sharing a chief, trying to fully staff the RPD, and looking at other ways in which we can share resources, et cetera, et cetera. And then second step of the path would be that survey committee. Is that kind of how you see it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I had met with Josh a month or 2 ago, to try to get a read on where we're going. Cause I'm putting together the budget for fiscal year 25 like you are. And I'm just like, what is this going to be? How, and who knows what it will be, but the way I've kind of got things now is that there's still some coverage, that we're still sharing a chief, that we're still providing some coverage. That may change depending on what happens here in Richmond. I think I'm going to have to leave it that way because who knows? And if we don't end up, but if you end up with some officers and we're not providing as much coverage, I think I have a way to address that within our budget, because we did hire 1 full-time officer that was dependent on enough revenue to cover them. So we probably have to do a little moving around perhaps. But
Well, I'm going to throw out a stupid question. When we're working on our budget, one of the issues we've had in recent years is we budget for a completely staffed police department, including a chief. And then surprise, surprise, in the fiscal year, we've got all this money left over. And people comment that why are we paying taxes that every year we know we're not going to spend and just keep putting it unassigned. So Josh put together 4 models for us to choose from. One where we would have our own chief and have a fully staffed department. How much would that cost? One where we would have 4 officers, but continue to share the chief, one that was this, one that was that. So we try to get a little closer to what might actually happen. And our budget is not finalized. It has been voted by the town, but the one we went with was a fully staffed department of 4 people, but still sharing the chief. And so if we were to hire the officer who the background check is still outstanding, and let's say I don't know what it may turn out. And if we really like the corporal and his dog, and we have this other notional officer, wherever he may be, we still have one open position. At that point, would it be an option to talk to that officer you hired just basically to be capable of doing Richmond coverage and see if that officer or an officer, I mean, officers are kind of fungible, would one of the officers be interested in just transferring?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, that would make sense and would help address, sort of my, the circumstances changing in revenue, but yeah, that would, I want to be able to offer that opportunity, say, to one of the officers that's already covering this town than someone who's, heavily been involved.
Anecdotally, I heard that there was a particular officer who's already sort of interested in doing that, but I don't have any specifics. I don't know if that.
They've all hinted at it. I mean, I've actually was just talking, I thought about this, where, I mean, if the reality is at this current moment in time, the contract may change that. But at this moment in time, there are a few officers that would make some more money than others, with a take-home car. And they, from the conversations that I've had, they don't want to be left, like, if this thing falls apart, they don't want to, they still want to be part of Hinesburg, and they're very happy to work with both towns, but they're worried if, I don't know how to say it.
I know,
If the
they wanna
contract
have that.
breaks, then you've got a musical
Yeah.
chair with one too few chairs.
And I mean, they keep sort of saying it's one of the big sticking points is they say it's, I don't think it's me, it's the department, it's Hinesburg. But it's like, well, we know you, we don't want to, Richmond decides to go a different direction. We're working for some other chief we don't know, in a year from now. So that's kind of how it was voiced to me.
Right.
So.
Interest but hesitation. They don't want to end up without a seat anywhere.
Right.
Yeah.
And I understand though that one of the biggest reasons we have an empty department right now is because no one wants to, trying to hire into a department with no chief. No one wants that. No one's gonna, they can go work anywhere right now. Yeah. An officer who is fully certified can work almost anywhere. A lot of it comes down to how close are they to your house, and is the chief one that you respect and trust? And no one wants to come work for an empty chair. Right now, I have not heard of any opinion of the select board to say, no, Anthony's horrible, let's get rid of him. In fact, quite the opposite. So in the short term, I don't see any likelihood of us saying we want to break the agreement, Anthony's no good. But that's just hearsay, that's not something an officer doesn't know what might happen in a year. And so they would have that hesitancy.
Mhm.
At some point, then I guess, and I'm not a lawyer, to provide a little more certainty at some point, do we want to look at extending a contract for a longer period of time so that there is that certainty? I don't know if that's even on the table.
I mean, I think that's exactly what we should be talking about right now, is sort of looking at the current agreement and adding some things to it. Like, I like your idea of, can Richmond officers cover Hinesburg, kind of make it a more long-term. I think we've had a lot of success with the small things we've tried, maybe some not so small, but what more could we coordinate? Like you were saying, like, is there budgetary things we can coordinate, and what needs to go into a contract? And then I think we sort of deepen the relationship that way and see, does that continue to work? Because it's working well so far. And then I think that would be a step towards after that, getting into the municipal district conversation. Or not. I mean, the other option is we just have a really good contract between the two towns. We never form a union municipal district. If it's working,
Right,
we don't have to have a UMD. We could have just
Exactly
a
right.
really good contract
Yep.
agreement.
and our current contract it goes until when?
I think it's,
Close to the end of this. fiscal year.
yeah, and I think
Okay.
there's some, yeah, between us and then the union, I think has some expectations of that as well.
But if we were to add things to it.
Yeah.
Make sure that both sides are content with it. Maybe make it a 5-year agreement and. At that point, a lot of, I think, the anxiety on the part of the Hinesburg officers who are afraid that they become over here and then we'd separate and they'd have some, who knows, that might diminish a bit.
So the question about the union district, would there be one budget?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
we want a full union district, then really that union district would be its own municipality. It would be its own governing body that just provides police services.
So that's the only caveat I would say to having two separate budgets is what if our budget gets voted down? Happened before.
It has, yeah.
So,
We've been very fortunate in that regard on this side.
so that, that could get ugly and messy.
Hmm, good point.
Marilee, I know sometimes when you're on a Zoom and people are talking in the room, it's sometimes awkward to just jump in, but do you have thoughts you'd like to share with us?
Well, thanks for asking, Jay. I appreciate your consideration. No, I'm excited to hear you talking about a 5-year contract. I think that would be great for the reasons that you stated. It would relieve a lot of anxiety. It would make it easier for Todd to project the budget going forward. And for the police officers, they would have the security of knowing what's going to come down the line instead of thinking, well, who knows how long this is going to last. It may end and then everything's going to change. So I think it is working well. People I've talked to have been very happy with it. And I'm really glad to hear you say that that you're so pleased with Anthony. We are too.
Mhm.
And the fact that Anthony is so successful in attracting new officers, I think speaks very highly of how he works with people. So I'm hopeful that that this 5-year contract can happen. And somebody, it may have been you, Jay, said maybe we could just stay with this rather than going for the union district. That would actually be my preference. I think the union district is more complicated than we need to be at this point.
Right. I would agree that if we have a 5-year contract and we've worked out budgetary issues so that we've kind of agreed who pays for what, et cetera. That's the union district and all with the actual governance structure.
Mhm.
And if it works for us, then maybe we don't need this separate municipality. Or maybe 5 years down the road, we'll feel differently.
Mhm.
At some point, Huntington or Bolton might come to us and say, can we get on board?
Yeah, actually, on that note, I did hear, going back probably almost a year now, from a Bolton select board member who said they would be interested. So we might want to just keep that more closer to the front burner. We want to
Mhm.
consider how would they be interested. I don't think they have a lot of money, but they would probably be interested in some coverage.
Yeah, they reached out to Hinesburg too about possibly getting some coverage.
Mhm.
Another quick side question, is the chief part of the hiring process as you?
He has been present for interviews and he brings us the candidates.
So he's very involved in the
Yeah.
hiring process.
And I really liked what you did in the interview with the first candidate. Putting him on the spot as you did at the end to make sure that kind of gauge what his opinions are about stuff. Some very important technical questions were asked at the end of the interview that I would not have thought to ask. I can't look at a guy and look at his resume and say, because of this, he'll make a good officer. That's why we need somebody who knows what they're doing.
And it seems important that officers in both departments have the same, are on the same
Yes.
page, whatever. that-
And I think after you have your meeting tomorrow, and if you get clarity on that question about Richmond officers, being able to, cover Hinesburg officers cover Richmond, then I think we, like Josh, Anthony, and I can meet and come up with some options based on what that answer to that question is. Because I've got some ideas, but I don't really want to,
Sure.
this thing is premature to.
Right, but you would come to us with a draft contract with additional things added.
That makes sense.
Okay. I'm pleased that at Hinesburg, the Hinesburg Select Board, Hinesburg residents, think this is working well. I had tended to wonder if Hinesburg residents would say, we're paying for a police department and then Richmond's using them. I didn't know if anybody would say, why aren't they over here providing coverage? But as you said, Todd, you hired an officer specifically to provide coverage. That you're not trying to make the existing HPD cover both towns with one town's worth of officers.
I do remember one question about that. I don't know if it was at one of our, we had some select board Q&A sort of meet and greet around town, and I remember that. I can't remember if it was specifically at one of those, but came from somebody, and so that's
Yeah.
the only.
There has been a little, yeah, I thought it would have been a little more noticed, and it didn't really get noticed, I don't think, publicly in either side. And so there are some people that are a little like, wait, what's going on? So I think there's more people that, especially on the Hinesburg side, just don't even realize that we're contracting at all. I think it's a little more because there's more visibility than there was before. There's Richmond seeing it probably a lot more than Hinesburg is. But there's been a few times where there's been, I think it was mentioned just in the BT Digger article that I'm sort of whatever with both towns, and I think a couple of people reached out to me like, hey, wait, what's going on here? So yeah, I don't know how to.
Well, I mean, I think that's a good sign. If they have no idea, then they're not feeling any impact.
Although we definitely do, as you said at the start of this, you are being stretched beyond what you really would ideally like to do. We do need to get you some additional administrative support. Is that kind of your sense?
I would say that's my biggest thing administratively. When, for instance, when I started as chief in Hinesburg 5 years ago, I had a 40-hour volunteer, Doug Olafson, which I would just say, hey, I want these stats, or I want whatever it was, whatever reports, or I mean, he did the computers, and I lost him after I think my first year, and then we had a 25-hour a week admin, put together cases, process tickets, things like that. All of that falls mostly on me, and then also on Brett, our sergeant. So, and now that's falling on us for 2 towns as well. So there is a lot more now on me than there was when I started in Hinesburg. So
Yeah, and I've spoke with Diane, who's our admin, and she said that she'd be up for helping you out. So if you've got, right now she's really looking back at a backlog of cases and things that she has to provide to the state. But yeah, if you have some certain things that she could do, I think she's only like 15 hours a week, but still, I'm sure she could help out with some things.
Is she interested in increasing her hours?
I don't believe so. We should have that conversation with her, but I think she sort of likes where she's at, but maybe the 3 of us could sit and talk and see, what do you need? What can she do? What are her hours? What could she increase to?
Right. Well, I do think that's a kind of a sooner rather than later thing, because our existing agreement runs for a little while longer, till the end of the fiscal year at least, and we've got months until then. And if this is, I don't want you at some point saying, you know what, I'm too stressed, I'm going to go to New Orleans and play jazz.
New Orleans.
I knew a guy who quit his job and went to New Orleans to play trombone. I guess this is a thing people do from time to time.
I've considered it, but
You play trumpet?
no, which is just as well I haven't followed through.
Yeah.
The only thing that I have to fall back on is teaching.
Well, in any agreement, we do have to kind of remember, what does Richmond bring to the table? We know what you bring to the table. You bring a chief that we are leasing, you bring your staff, you bring the facilities of your station. We bring money pretty much at this point, although we do have, such as it is, a department downstairs, I mean, offices, but
I think though, I mean, to Todd's point about if we can share patrol services, and I think back to one of the other conversations we had where you had sort of already mapped out a way to schedule officers to cover both towns, do it effectively, provide enough time off for them, and make sure there's always 2 or 3 officers on, maybe even 6. I forget how many you had, but you had a really nice schedule worked out. If you had more staff, and that provides a better working environment for each officer, in each municipality, and better coverage for the residents. So as we staff up, I think it helps, at least on staffing.
Yeah, I think definitely we both can bring resources, then we can provide better service to both towns. That would be the ideal.
and right now, I don't know how often an officer would call for backup and have the VSP say, we don't have anybody.
Yeah, we don't really depend on VSP. It's just never been part of our, they're just too far. And so basically, traditionally what Hinesburg does is we either have somebody on with that person. I try my hardest to make sure that we have more than one person on shift. And if not, I'm coming from home or somebody else. That all our officers live fairly close. So somebody's coming from home is how we've always done it. So,
You know, you mentioned one of the things that's been a consistent source of complaints on our end is that our officers have tended to live an hour away. Randolph, Brandon. We've even chatted, nothing has been set on paper about the idea of providing, how to put this, an incentive for people who would live in Richmond.
Yep, and that's part of our conversation with the union too.
Yeah.
can I be first on that one?
But has that been an issue, finding people who will live close or?
No, because I won't even consider, if you're not within a certain radius, it wouldn't even make it on, it wouldn't even make it to Todd at that point because I'm not going to hire somebody in Pittsfield or you know,
Right.
it's just not, it's not logical. It's not doable. And even if we were giving a cruiser, which we don't, we'd be cycling cars out, you know, too soon.
Right.
So my sort of philosophy on hiring is I'm always scouting. We're fully staffed now, but I always have sort of people that I have my eyes on, and we've had people waiting that we've made part-timers that have been waiting for a full-time job. We don't sort of have that sort of training ground mentality. We are somebody that you want to land and probably finish your career. You've been someplace else now, you want to come to Hinesburg because of what it has to offer. That's kind of how, and I think that model's been fairly successful. And that's the model that I also want to have for sort of Richmond to have that reputation as well.
Right, and that's, you put your finger right on it for years, as long as I've lived here in Richmond since 2002. And we see an officer come in, work for us for 18 months, and then go get a job somewhere else for more money. Well, some of the time anyway, that's the perception. That you come work here until the next stage of your career and then you move on.
Yeah, we've a lot of our people have, even people that have left have been around the 10-year mark, 10 plus years. I think Jeremy just hit 9. Frank Bryan's at 7. It's a little different now because we did have that little crisis, last year, but having people stay is shows stability, and there's a reason why. I think I have a good formula. I think we have a good formula for the police department. So
Right. And we well, a lot of us talk about community policing. We want officers that people know and who know us, and not people who will be gone in 6 months and now we've got new fresh faces. Obviously, long-term continuity helps with that. And your guys have done a great job in the short time they've been with us, making, if I say, so how do you like Officer Thomas to random business center here on Bridge Street? They will have an answer. They do a very good job getting out of their cars.
Good to hear.
So it sounds like next steps would be, obviously, we talk to the union.
Mhm.
We bring up the joint patrolling both towns thing. We'll be talking, one of the topics I'm sure is on our list, but I don't have it in front of me, is cars. Whether we're gonna give take-home cars on an ongoing basis, and if we give that up, what do they want to return? But then after we've had that meeting, then you three kind of sitting and looking at the contract and saying, if this was a 5-year contract, what would we want to add to it?
Mhm. I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. Andy, thoughts?
Yeah. Over the past year, anytime I've worked with this current arrangement, it's been very favorable. I've been quite impressed with how well Hinesburg is working with Richmond. The occasional joint missions, if you want to call it, that we've done work exceedingly smooth. So I've been quite impressed. Thoroughly endorse the concept of continuing our relationship. I tend to favor a unified agency because I think it provides more job security. When you're hiring somebody now on a short-term contract, even though you're hiring them as a Richmond officer, they look at, well, how long, what's my job security? This contract's only good for 2 years. You make it 5, yeah, that's a good step for now. As you go further down that road and they are looking at a shorter term, they're going to want some assurance that things are going to, am I going to have a job in 2 years?
Right.
That has had a lot to do with why some of the last officers left, because there was the lack of assurance that things were going to continue. Especially when they read things in Front Porch Forum about why do we need officers. Now that did not contribute to retaining those people either. I had a lot of conversations with many of the officers because they could talk to me because I wasn't part of their organization, but was still law enforcement of a sort anyways. Some of them did leave because of those things. The upward mobility has been another issue. Is there any chance to increase my my job here? Not really in a small department. If you get into a combined service, you got a bigger agency, there's a little more room, a little more room to grow. That helps keep them here too.
Bart, I know you've got COVID, and so you're probably not feeling super chatty, but did you have anything you wanted to share?
Not really. This all sounds good. The one thing I thought of, and it probably comes up anyway, is do we want to consider including some kind of language about the administrative support and shared administrative report in a contract?
Right. I think that would be wise for the reasons we've discussed. Saying, well, our 15-hour per week person could kind of help out. Well, that's not something that you can go to sleep at night knowing. It's like, I will if I can. That's not really something you can take to the bank. And I want to make sure that we don't have things like cases not being prosecuted by the state's attorney because we didn't turn in the paperwork. Now, I'm sure you would never do that, but there's a lot of paper that floats around, and sometimes it's hard. You said it yourself, it's hard to keep ahead of it all unless you just don't sleep.
All our stuff gets processed.
Yeah, but it just takes you a lot of time, and it's time that you're doing, as you said, you're doing it for 2 towns. So I would rather get you administrative support that you can count on.
Yeah, I'm certainly not complaining. I just wanted to sort of mention that there's a lot of stuff that's not seen. There is a lot of behind the scenes stuff.
Mhm.
You know, it's across the board, building maintenance. I mean, there's and the same thing now with Richmond. I got the guys downstairs putting the door locks on. So, you know, there's a lot of balls to juggle. It's
Right.
You know, it's not just what's seen. So that's kind of what I was trying to.
Yeah, and that's my point too. I don't like the idea of I'll do it if I can, because either it gets done, but at the cost of your sanity, or we find somebody who has time, or we make it a little more formal. And we put into a contract that we will fund a 40-hour position and this town will chip in this much, this town will chip in that much. That would really be my preference.
Okay, yeah.
I just think
So are we think for admin?
if you had a 40-hour week person, would there be work for them to do?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I just don't want to, you know, at the end of the day, I don't want to lose sight of the point of this endeavor is to get both towns good policing at a good price.
Mhm.
So, you know, I want us to, it's something I was thinking hard about last night, like what do we need, you know, to be successful? I don't want to grow the department for the sake of growing.
Mhm.
It is for, like I said, good policing at a good price. And sort of at the end of the day, if there's anything, even if this doesn't work out, if there's anything that I hope that we can give to Richmond is sort of that setup of how we do things and what our sort of culture is, that successful formula, or I like to think it's successful.
Right. I know that when you look at college tuition, where did this come from? College tuition. One of the reasons that college tuition has exploded is because of the grotesque, just out of the crazy expansion, not of teachers, but of the bureaucracy of the staff. You know, where a university might have had 3 vice presidents, 1 provost, and a president. Now they've got 17 vice presidents. I mean, if you actually look, a huge.
I worked at UVM for.
So you know the truth.
Yeah.
So we don't want to merge or kind of merge and then just find ourselves going down that same path by saying, well, we need an admin and we need somebody to do this. Next thing you know, you're costing more than you did before. But I think there are some things that if the 2 towns come together and pay for, I don't know, maybe it's a 30-hour person, you know, somebody who might be willing to expand their hours if there's work. It's just something I'd like us to look at. Because I'm a big believer in, as you are, in keeping your records up to date and accurate and findable and not having to go, and you would never say this, but having to go, oh, it was around here somewhere, which is kind of what we used to get.
You do have a question.
Okay, Ann?
Yes, I'm glad you returned to discussing Chief Anthony's request. I don't think it should be, his need for administrative assistance should not be volunteer. It's very boring work, but it needs to be done really accurately. And so I just wanted to say strongly support his getting that assistance immediately, actually, so that he and his other officers are not burdened beyond what they need to be prioritizing. And if they need assistance, they should have it now. Thank you.
Okay. So it sounds like we have an agreement on a path forward. We talked to our union. We bring up the topics that have been raised today. Josh has been making notes. Then Anthony and Todd and Josh come together and start hashing out a framework for an updated contract. And it can include looking at administration. Is there anything that we're overlooking? Is there anything where people are going, when are they going to discuss this? And we never did. I know I've done a ton of the talking, but that wasn't my goal. Connie, you've joined. Connie Van Egan is on the call, and she's a member of our Richmond Racial Equity Group, which is very interested in policing. Connie, I'm going to look to you since you're here. Do you have any thoughts based on what you've heard?
No, I didn't, Jay. I was curious and running in between meetings. So I just appreciate being able to join and catch up a little bit. It sounds like conversations are continuing, and that's one of the things I wanted to hear. So thank you.
Okay. Marilee, I'll defer to you. As chair of the Hinesburg Select Board, is there anything else you'd like to say before we maybe start thinking about wrapping up?
Well, I look forward to seeing details about how it will work when you hire Richmond police officers. And you have discussed that and the issues that might come up and the boundaries and delineations that need to be in place. So I'll be interested to see that. And I also like the idea that if that this sixth officer that we've hired, whose salary is contingent on our contract with Richmond, if that kind of changes, that somebody from Hinesburg may end up becoming a Richmond police officer. But those are very important things to get clear and written down. I was also happy to hear, because I know it was an issue last time, that Hinesburg's very popular community policing model and the attitude that Hinesburg policemen have, that Richmond is interested in doing that also, because when we met before, it wasn't clear to me that Richmond was interested in that form of policing. So I'm glad to hear that that you are.
Yeah, Marilee, one of the things, there's a term, warrior mentality versus guardian mentality. I'm not saying that we've had the warrior mentality here, but we don't want it. We want people that are our neighbors. We really do value community policing. We think that the abuses that you see in larger cities and in some smaller cities of the us versus them, the towns who get military surplus equipment and drive around, like Ferguson, Missouri, where they're driving around on basically tanks, that has no place here. We want a town where we're not just paying lip service, but really the police are part of the community. I don't think anybody in Richmond or Hinesburg wants people sitting behind billboards running speed traps all the time when they could be out actually interacting and being visible. Where I came from in the South, that was basically, you passed a billboard, there was probably an officer behind it eating donuts. I'm not exactly kidding either. So yeah, I'm pleased by all these discussions, and I am looking forward to talking to our union guy tomorrow and then seeing what the three of you can put together.
Sounds good.
With are we about ready to wrap up? Is there any closing comments that I would like to make? Well, that was,
Assuming that pay discrepancy and that's going to be part of the discussion.
That's not their discussion.
Yeah.
it's a discussion probably that needs to happen, but it would be on your end. Or at some point, if it needs to be part of, it wouldn't be our end, but it could be both of our ends at some point, but right now it's on your end.
Yeah, right now it's internal discussion.
But we want to treat our officers well, and that's not just always pay. It's a lot of working conditions. It's a lot of things, but we want to make sure, as Anthony said, that we have officers who feel happy here, who are part of our community, and who would be here for some time, who don't look at this as the next step. So it's all part of the whole package. What do we bring to our officers? And pay is obviously one aspect of that.
Hmm.
Okay, well, it is 11:58. So as we like to joke at my office, I'll give you 2 minutes back. Thank you all so much for taking part.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming today.
Yeah. Thank you, Jay. Nice job leading us.
Well, thank you.
All right.